I must appeal to Babangida. If he really truly loves Nigeria, he should set Nigeria free. If he becomes a civilian, as the army seems to be telling him to do now, it will make things a lot easier, because it will be one civilian against the other. A man with a loaded gun, it takes a lot of courage to confront him the way God has had to make me do in the last few days, in the last few weeks. But if he did not want a transition, why order an election?
Cancel. It's not competent. Cancel. Yes. IBB is not competent. He must go.
The Babangida regime faced unprecedented political and social unrest, religious violence, and presided over an era of extreme economic hardship. Yet, it managed to survive one crisis after another and remain in power for 8 years. No Nigerian leader fastened his hands as tightly to power as Babangida did, and no challenge he faced could loosen his grip. Colonel Mohammed Marwa once told one of his colleagues that nobody can overthrow General Babangida. He cannot be overthrown. It's as simple as that. How true was Marwa's statement? How did Babangida manage to confront every challenge, threat and crisis and emerge intact? This is the legend of IBB, General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida. For this, I'll be reading excerpts from Mike Suleon's book, Soldiers of Fortune, Nigerian Politics from Buhari to Babangida. I've provided links in the description if you would like to buy a book, and I'd strongly recommend that you do. If you enjoy our channel, drop us a comment, let us know what you think, let us know where you're watching from, hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Military regimes are ironically more unstable and susceptible to coup than democratic governments, since they can only be removed by an intra-military revolt. In military regimes, personality clashes and perceived unfavorable treatment of officers can become matters of national security. Disgruntled officers are potentially dangerous sources of instability and coup plots. Military rule did not only separate the military leadership from civil society, but also created a schism within the military itself, between officers in the government and those left behind to attend to purely military duties. This latter schism was extremely dangerous because the jealousy and envy it caused could potentially lead disgruntled officers to plot coups against their colleagues in the government. Babangida correctly surmised that the greatest threat to his regime existed among radical junior and middle-ranking officers with egos and ambitions that could not be satisfied in routine military postings. To neutralize their threats, Babangida co-opted some of the most politicized of such officers, such as Abubakar Umar, Lawan Gwadabe, David Mark, Tanko Ayuba, and Ahmed Abdullahi into his regime and deployed multiple strategies to prevent his subordinates from overthrowing him. Strategy 1. Retirements, dismissals, and rotations. Although it was little analyzed at the time, Babangida became the first Nigerian military leader to refer to himself as president. Previous military leaders used the benign appellation head of state. Armed Forces ruling council members did not oppose his use of the title, erroneously believing it to be an irrelevant issue of taxonomy. By the time they realized the relevance of Babangida's appropriation of the title, it was too late. Babangida's press secretary, Major Debo Bashorun, claimed that Babangida took the decision to call himself president on the spur of the moment while in a car en route to broadcasting his inaugural speech. Whatever the origins of the decision, by using the title, Babangida acquired for himself the sweeping powers of an executive president as stipulated in Nigeria's 1979 constitution and more. The title president was not merely ceremonial, and Babangida was not shy about exercising even more substantial powers than any of his military predecessors. Babangida's appropriation of the title and use of it as an instrument to concentrate ever-increasing power in his hands had far-reaching consequences. He reserved for himself the unilateral right to appoint the Chief of General Staff, Minister of Defense, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs, and the heads of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Police, and NSO. These appointments had previously been made collectively by members of the SMC. Babangida additionally acquired the exclusive right to appoint and dismiss members of the AFRC. AFRC members usually serve ex officio, but when Babangida dissolved the AFRC in February 1989, he formalized his control over the composition of the reappointed AFRC by issuing letters of appointment to its members. Further emphasizing his authority, the AFRC did not have regular calendar dates for periodic meetings. Instead, Babangida reserved the power to summon AFRC meetings when he pleased on an ad hoc basis. Babangida also diluted the power of his deputy. Although the CGS had no authority over military affairs, Babangida further de-emphasized the position by curtailing its influence over political policy, leaving the CGS with the largely administrative task of supervising the state military governors. This reduction in the deputy's power was a reaction to the considerable profile and power wielded by the former number 2, Idi Agbon. Babangida was not only president but also chairman of the National Council of Ministers, the National Council of States, the Armed Forces Consultative Assembly, Police Service Commission, and served as Minister of Defense. The Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, Ministry of Defense, Police, Rural Affairs, State Security Service, SSS, National Intelligence Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency, Budget Department, and all instruments of his political transition program, such as the Political Bureau, Constitution Review Committee, Constituent Assembly, and the Directorate for Mass Mobilization for Social and Economic Recovery, were also brought under his office at the presidency. These measures caused an unparalleled concentration of power in the hands of Babangida, making him potentially the most powerful ruler in Nigeria's history. Prior to Babangida, Nigerian military regimes were exercises in collective governance by the officers in the Military Ruling Council. The Murtala Obasanjo regime of 1975 to 1979 had internal restrictions that bound the head of state to any measure approved by 2/3 of the SMC. Babangida's rise to power marks the end of the collective-style military regimes and the beginning of an autocratic, personalized dictatorship. Babangida embarked on a trajectory of personal as opposed to the traditional collegial military rule. He dissolved and reconstituted the ruling military council at will and informed his military colleagues of decisions rather than consult with the official decision-making bodies. Babangida was able to elicit or coerce loyalty by reserving the power of appointment and dismissal over every member of the government and armed forces. Every public officer could be in no doubt that failure to demonstrate the expected level of loyalty could bring dismissal or forced retirement. The Babangida government cannot be said to have been in any sense a collegiate military regime, headed as it was by an imperial president with the unilateral power to dismiss his government and military colleagues at will. Genuine dissent and interaction could not have been preserved in an environment where the livelihood and survival of government officials was dependent on their continued loyalty to the president and remaining in his good books. The concentration of power in one man's hand made merit a far less important factor than personal loyalty to the person of the president. Ishola Williams, a political officer who served in the military regime during the Babangida era, confessed, "When the army is in politics, loyalty comes first before merit." Ironically, Babangida exercised a type of non-inclusive leadership which he used as a justification for the coup that brought him to power. Babangida's Defense Secretary, General Dumkadbali, later referred to Babangida's regime as a one-man dictatorship. With his imperial presidential power of appointment and dismissal, Babangida constantly rotated, redeployed, and/or retired state military governors, cabinet ministers, senior officers, and the ruling military council itself. He dismissed or dissolved the entire AFRC 3 times. Prior to Babangida, no military ruler had ever dismissed the entire ruling military council or had the right to do so. In his time in power, Babangida used nearly 80 different military governors, over 50 different members of the military ruling council, AFRC/NDSC, and nearly 60 different cabinet ministers. Over 100 military officers served as military governors or AFRC members. That figure can perhaps be doubled if the officers who served as ADCs, task force chairmen, and as members of military created parastatals are included. Of the 28 members of Babangida's inaugural AFRC in August 1985, only 5 remained by the time he left office. That is, Babangida himself, along with Sani Abacha, Augustus Aikomu, Murtala Nyako, and Joshua Dongoyaro. Unitary is a dangerous word in Nigerian politics. The overconcentration of governmental power at the center is a raw nerve. Major General Aguiyi Ironsi's regime is reviled in northern Nigeria, and his murder and overthrow was motivated by his formation of a unitary government and redesignation of Nigeria's governmental institutions in terms that removed the word federal from governing organs. He died for unitarism. Babangida's regime was a federal military government in name only. Babangida essentially operated a unitary government. He was the most centralized, unitary, and autocratic government in Nigeria's history. He practiced a form of unitary governance more centralized than anything envisaged by Aguiyi Ironsi or any other Nigerian ruler. The Babangida government destroyed the spirit of federalism in Nigeria's government and politics. An examination of the relationship between the federal and state governments during the Babangida era will demonstrate the extent to which the state autonomy was diluted. The erosion of state autonomy began with the Murtala Muhammad regime in 1975. That government deliberately selected military governors from the middle ranks of the officer corps and excluded them from the SMC. The intention and effect was to reduce the governor's autonomy and to exercise tighter control over the conduct of individual state affairs. Desire for oversight and control of military governors' handling of state affairs was accurately stated as one of the reasons for the regime's overthrow of Gowon. However, the degree of federal control exercised over state military governors during the Babangida era far exceeded this and was remarkable. The CGS Vice Admiral Aikomu admitted that state military governors were regarded as agents of the FMG or military postings. Aikomu issued military governors with budget guidelines, and they were expected to implement directives issued by Aikomu's office in consultation with Babangida and the service chiefs. They were mandated to ensure the uniform application of federal government policy to their states and were given generally applicable written instructions mandating them how to govern the states. Aikomu periodically reviewed the conduct of the military governors to assess whether they had faithfully executed federal policy in their states in accordance with his instructions. There was no real distinction between the policies of the federal state and the local governments. Thus, for example, Sokoto State was expected to be governed in the same manner as River State, despite the massive disparity in culture, religion, education, and finances between the two states. The military governors became glorified prefects of the federal government at state level. They were no more than federal emissaries in the states they governed. They served at the pleasure of Babangida. Their tenure was dependent on loyalty to him and the execution of policy consistent with his will, and he could revoke their appointments at any time. Promotions and dismissals, revolving doors. During Nigeria's 27th Independence Day parade in Abuja on October 1st, 1987, Babangida surprisingly appeared in the uniform of an Air Chief Marshal. An Air Chief Marshal is the Air Force equivalent rank to a 4-star general in the Army. This was symbolic of Babangida's promotion to a 4-star Army general. During a military parade featuring tanks, armored vehicles, and an Air Force display, Babangida's service chiefs also appeared in new ranks. Both the Defense Secretary Domkat Bali and Chief of Army Staff Sani Abacha were promoted to Lieutenant General. Augustus Aikomu, Chief of General Staff, and Patrick Koshoni, Chief of Naval Staff, were both promoted to Vice Admiral, and the Chief of Air Staff, Ibrahim Alpha, to Air Marshal. Alpha had a long association with Babangida, having been his co-conspirator over a decade earlier during the coup that deposed General Gowon. In the raft of promotions, former military head of state Yakubu Gowon, who had been stripped of his rank for alleged complicity in the coup in which General Murtala Muhammad was assassinated, had his rank of general restored. Such promotions served a double purpose. They rewarded officers who were loyal and had risked their lives in coups. They were also used as opportunities to purge and rotate military elements that Babangida did not entirely trust or who were slow to demonstrate unequivocal support for him. Babangida's continual retirement, dismissal, rotation, and reassignment of the military kept officers so discombobulated that they did not have the opportunity to build the critical support network necessary to execute coups before they were shunted off to another role where they could not cause trouble. It also kept them wealthy and satisfied, and created continuous revolving door vacancies for other ambitious officers to fill. Although Babangida told senior and middle ranks that it is not possible to appoint all of you into the government, he tried as hard as possible to extend the tentacles and benefits of the FMG to as many officers as possible. This was the rationale for his decision in 1989 to form a 265-member Armed Forces Consultative Assembly AFCA, consisting of battalion commanding officers and above, their equivalents in the Navy and Air Force, and selected staff officers. The AFCA was inaugurated to provide a platform for the upward transmission of opinion from middle ranks and met a few times a year. Its effect was to further politicize the military down to its middle ranks. Babangida also included relatively junior officers such as Colonels Akilu, Aminu, Mark, Ogbeha, Razaki, Shagaya, and Umar in the AFRC. In previous military regimes, the ruling military council had traditionally been the preserve of senior officers. According to Babangida, the inclusion of lower rank officers was intended to expand his support base. Anytime you stage a coup, naturally there are those who are the core elements, but you want to enlarge the support base of that group, so you have to reach out to other people. We have to look for friends and to establish a strong support base within the constituency. So we enlarged the group, and virtually all the officers were brought in one way or the other. In December 1987, during the launching ceremony of Major General Joe Garba's memoirs, Diplomatic Soldiering, former head of state General Olusegun Obasanjo criticized Babangida's policies such as the Structural Adjustment Program, the postponement of the return to democratic rule from 1990 to 1992, and the continued detention of Major Generals Buhari and Idiagbon. These comments were viewed by some seasoned coup veterans in the Babangida regime as coup baiting. Babangida was extremely familiar with coup baiting, having employed these tactics himself on a number of prior occasions. The ever-paranoid Babangida immediately reshuffled the Army High Command. The GOC of the 2nd Mechanized Division in Ibadan, Major General Garba Duba, swapped positions with the GOC of the 3rd Armored Division in Jos, Brigadier Joshua Dogoyaro. The Commandant of the Nigerian Army School of Infantry, Major General Sani Sami, swapped positions with the GOC of the 82nd Division in Enugu, Brigadier Oladipo Odia. The Commandant of the Command and Staff College in Jaji, Major General Paul Umu, was removed from his post and appointed Principal Staff Officer at the Defense Headquarters. Umu replaced Major General Duru Ajayi, who became the Nigerian Army's new Adjutant General. Major General Abdullahi Maman replaced Umu as Commandant of the Command and Staff College. However, the tactic of using government posts to reward loyal officers had the effect of prematurely ending the careers of senior officers who had committed no offense or who had unblemished records but were not interested in politics. The August 1990 purge. Babangida's desire to massage the egos of his loyalists and coup plotters led to the exit of two powerful and respected officers in his regime. However, the Bali and Ukiwe controversies discussed in Chapter 7 were not the zenith of Babangida's tinkering with his government's composition. He carried out another massive purge of the military in August 1990, during which over 100 senior officers were retired. During this exercise, Babangida also retired all military officers that held ministerial appointments. Although he retired his officers from military service, he retained them as civilian ministers in the government. This was the case with Ike Nwachukwu, Yohana Kure, Gadonasco, and Maman Kontagora. Babangida also further civilianized the FMG by retiring the CGS Vice Admiral Aikomu from the Navy, but retaining him as his deputy, albeit with the new title of Vice President. Despite these purges and promotions, the army had a glass ceiling for Igbo officers who were still distrusted after the Igbo-led January 1966 coup and the Civil War. The highest rank that Igbos could hope to reach was brigadier. Ike Nwachukwu broke the mold when he became the first Igbo officer to reach the rank of Major General and also to be appointed a GOC since Major General Aguiyi Ironsi over 20 years earlier. Nwachukwu's case was helped by the fact that his mother was a Fulani and he fought for the Nigerian army during the Civil War against his paternal Igbo brethren, thus avoiding the stigma of being a former rebel. In military regimes, the Chief of Army Staff is de facto the second most powerful man after the head of state. Although the head of state is the titular commander-in-chief of the military, the Chief of Army Staff exercises day-to-day operational control over the army. The head of state's survival is contingent on the Chief of Army Staff's loyalty to him and his grip on the army. During the August 1990 reshuffle, Babangida promoted the former Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Sani Abacha, to Defense Secretary, who took the portfolio from Babangida. This intricate game of musical chairs with military postings might have been a deft maneuver to get the ambitious Abacha to vacate the post of Chief of Army Staff. Nonetheless, the reshuffle created upward mobility for other officers. Under the new configuration, Babangida surprised everyone by appointing Major General Salihu Ibrahim as the new Chief of Army Staff. Ibrahim was praised in several quarters as a thoroughly professional army officer and a soldier's soldier. Although Ibrahim was recognized as an outstanding officer, there were many other officers who were senior to him, including Major General Nwachukwu, Haladu, Useni, Nasku, Duba, and Kuri. Babangida appointed Ibrahim Chief of Army Staff ahead of not just the foregoing senior officers, but also ahead of his coursemates who graduated with him from the NDA's first regular combatant course, such as Dogoyaro, Dia, and Aliu Mohammed. There were three reasons for this appointment. Firstly, Ibrahim was an apolitical and professional officer who was unlikely to plan a coup. A colleague confirmed that Ibrahim was a vintage professional soldier. Secondly, as a member of the minority Ebira ethnic group in the Middle Belt, Ibrahim did not have an independent constituency of his own in the army. Thirdly, Babangida belatedly realized how much he had politicized the army. Worried by officers' increasing propensity to correlate military rewards and accomplishments with coup plotting, Babangida appointed Ibrahim as a symbolic message to army officers that they did not have to stage coups in order to lead the army. The two previous occupants of the post, Abacha and Babangida himself, were both politicized coup plotters, as were many of the other leading contenders for the job. By contrast, Ibrahim had wisely kept himself out of Nigeria's Machiavellian coup plots. He attained his rank on the basis of his professional competence. After graduating from the Nigerian Military School, Ibrahim joined the army as an NTO, then started officer training at the NDA in 1964. He was awarded the Sword of Honor for being the best cadet in his pioneer graduating class from the NDA's first regular combatant course in 1967. The appointment of Ibrahim caused other complexities in command postings and attrition among the senior officer corps. The tradition in the Nigerian army is that officers do not usually serve under the command of their coursemates or juniors. Babangida retired officers senior to Ibrahim, including Major Generals Ike Nwachukwu, Charles Ndiomu, Sani Sami, Yohana Kure, Gadonasco, Paul Omu, and Sunday Iferi. This exercise also saw the retirement of the last 7 Sandhouse-trained generals such as Major Generals Duro Ajayi and A.B. Maman. With Ibrahim as Chief of Army Staff, accommodation had to be made for his NDA coursemates who could not serve under him. Babangida circumvented the problem by either retiring Ibrahim's coursemates such as Major General Rabiu Aliu and Maman Kontagora, or appointing those not retired such as Major Generals Dia, Dogoyaro, and Aliu Mohammed to try service appointments at Defense Headquarters, which took them out of Ibrahim's operational command. They were given roles that reported directly to the Ministry of Defense or Babangida, bypassing Ibrahim's chain of command. Aliu Mohammed was posted out of his command as a GOC of the 2nd Mechanized Division and was kept bouncing around tri-service appointments for the next 3 years. He was first sent to the Defense Headquarters as Chief of Administration, then he was appointed Commandant of the NDA, then finally National Security Advisor in January 1993. Dia was also sent to tri-service appointments at Defense Headquarters and was appointed Commandant of the National War College. On September 20, 1990, Dogoyaro was named Field Commander of the ECOMOG Peacekeeping Mission in Liberia. When he returned, he was appointed Commandant of the Command and Staff College. Many Nigerian civilians assume, often incorrectly, that political distractions rob Nigerian soldiers of their fighting spirit and martial skills. A distinction needs to be made between two types of soldiers in military regimes. There are soldiers who serve in political roles, for example as military governors and ministers. The other category is soldiers who, although members of the military government, combine political duties with active military postings and command, for example GOCs. Dogoyaro was in the latter category. He was a fighting soldier from the Army's Armored Corps. He was a tall, physically imposing, old-school soldier with the bluff swagger of a Wild West gunslinger. He was well connected and respected, being a personal friend of Babangida. He had played pivotal roles in Nigeria's two perceived military coups and was a member of the pioneer intake of cadets which graduated from the NDA in 1967. In October 1990, Babangida also promoted the service chiefs. Salihu Ibrahim was elevated to Lieutenant General, Murtala Nyako, Chief of Naval Staff, was promoted to Full Admiral, and Nuraini Yusuf, Chief of Air Staff, to Air Marshal. Strategy 2. The Retired Millionaires Generals Club.